I was just saying that I'm in Jerusalem. Just came from Gaza, where I spent the day. As you may know, this week I've been in a mission to the Middle East, starting with Lebanon, Syria, West Bank, Gaza. This has been a very intense week in a special context, as you know, when new leadership in Lebanon, new regime in Syria, and the ceasefire in Gaza is opening opportunities and responsibilities for all of us. In the interest of time, I would focus just in Gaza, but of course I will be available to answer to any question about Gaza, but also about the other points on the mission. As I mentioned, just came from Gaza, spent a day in Gaza, and unfortunately the humanitarian catastrophe that Gazans face continues. And as the uncertainties mount, we need to focus all efforts on avoiding a return to war, which would be an absolute tragedy. And I reiterate the call for a permanent ceasefire and the release of all hostages without delay. The ceasefire has offered a much-needed respite, but there is simply no time to lose. Our hope has been that the ceasefire creates the conditions to ensure rapid, uninterrupted, and safe humanitarian access to provide relief for all. UNOPS, as you know, UNOPS is the UN agency focused on infrastructure, procurement, project management. We are present in 100 countries, 6,000 personnel. We stand ready to support implementation of the ceasefire deal and scale up the delivery of sustained humanitarian relief. We reiterate the call for a permanent ceasefire and the release of hostages without delay. My colleagues have been on the ground in Gaza from day one, my team, working to support the broader humanitarian operations in Gaza. Our response includes many aspects, but mainly three, if I may, which is our work on procurement, delivery and monitoring, and lately the distribution of fuel. Also, our work to manage the operation of the so-called UN 2720 mechanism. So the mechanism that was created from the Security Council resolution, which aims to increase and speed up the delivery of life-saving humanitarian assistance to Gaza. So UNOPS has been managing and implementing the mechanism in coordination with Sigrid Kaag. And our work together with UN Mine Action to mitigate the dangers of landmines and unexploded ordnance. On fuel, my colleagues on the ground have played a unique role, and the good news is that before the ceasefire, we were providing on average 100,000 liters per day of fuel, and now we are providing and distributing 1.3 million liters per day, which confirms, as we always said, that once the political conditions and once the security conditions would allow, we would be able to scale up and to speed up delivery. This provision of fuel, as you know, it's critical in the absence of other sources of energy, because unfortunately today Gaza has no connections on electricity. Almost all solar panels are destroyed. Only fuel remains as the lifeline element. And this is critical for hospitals, for schools, for bakeries, for houses. And that's why scaling the capacity on fuel represents a breakthrough. This work, as I mentioned, is usually significant. And of course, I remain available. I'm available in the Q&A to focus more on this. In parallel, we also manage, as I mentioned, the UN 2720 mechanism, which aims to expedite, streamline, and accelerate the process of providing assistance to Gaza and help ensure that aid continues to reach its civilian destination. On behalf of the UN system, we also coordinate and manage the access through the Access Support Unit. So let me share just 2 or 3 data points on the mechanism. First, this mechanism, as of 13th February, has facilitated close to 78,000 metric tons of aid being delivered in Gaza. And most importantly, 70% of all approvals of consignments have been done in less than 24 hours. So the mechanism provided more transparency, accountability, predictability, and efficiency, which obviously was critical. But as we always said, the issue was never from a logistic point of view. The issue was political. It was the lack of political will. And that's why the ceasefire has created the conditions, as we have seen in the last 3 weeks, to bring more aid and to ensure that the aid could reach those most in need. Finally, on mine action, we, in partnership with UN Mine Action, we mitigate the dangers of landmines and unexploded ordnance. As you imagine, this is particularly important in Gaza. An estimated 40 million tons of debris and rubble generated by the conflict will take years to remove. Today, in my visit, I was astonished, very impressed with the scale of devastation. And I've seen the footage, we have seen the footage, but there is nothing like seeing that directly. I've been in Gaza 1 year ago, and now again, I can see the scale of destruction, and particularly the impact on rubble. Gaza is flooded, surrounded by rubble. 40 to 50 million tons of rubble. And this rubble includes, unfortunately, human remains. It includes, unfortunately, unexploded ordnance. So we are dealing not just with rubble. We are dealing with obviously a very complex situation. To date, on this activity to mitigate explosive device risks, we have been working, supporting the convoys, the UN convoys through Gaza. Our officers conduct threat and risk assessments across Gaza, enabling critical humanitarian aid convoys and activities. To date, our team has completed almost 400 assessments and accompanied 400 high-risk convoys to vulnerable areas potentially contaminated. Finally, my final comment, and then of course I'll be glad to answer to questions, is that from what I've seen today, it's critical to move as soon as possible to the early recovery, because the scale of devastation, particularly on infrastructure, is very impressive. You have 70% of all infrastructure destroyed, 60% of all houses destroyed, 65% of all roads destroyed. This represents around $30 billion of cost. People have no place to go. So the houses are destroyed. They are moving from one place to the other, and they don't have the number of shelters that is needed. Tents are not a longer-term solution. So I think it's really important that we take the opportunity that the ceasefire has created to bring all humanitarian aid, but also create the conditions as soon as possible to early recovery and reconstruction. Thank you.
I'll now turn the floor over for any questions from the media. Yes, Tony.
Thank you. Jorge, right? Your name is Jorge?
It's George, but you can call me Jorge, no problem.
Okay.
Jorge or George or
because
George,
the way it was
okay.
written, we had the impression that it was Jorge, not George, or George, or that's why. Anyway, back to the question. Thank you very much for your briefing. I want to hear more from you about the picture in Gaza today. You mentioned we're talking about 40 to 50 million tons of rubble. You mentioned 70% of infrastructure is destroyed. We would like to hear more, if you can elaborate more about this picture, please, with more clarity and numbers as well, because you know us journalists, we love numbers and percentages. And also, if you can clarify the fact that with all the media, the reports and the talks today with the proposal of the US administration to move people from Gaza in order to do the recovery that you're mentioning, do you agree with this plan? Do you see that it's a realistic plan, or do you see that no, the people maybe we can recover or we can achieve a recovery in Gaza while the people are there? I would like to hear your take on this, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the last point that you have made, my colleagues in the noon briefings have already brought the official position of the UN and the sectional position, which is forced displacement is not consistent with international humanitarian law, and obviously let's not make the situation more difficult and complex than it is now. What I've seen, as I mentioned, was quite impressive, but I will also bring some positive tone, because I imagine that you want to hear from me what I've seen in terms of impact, but also signals, particularly because I've been in Gaza previously. I visit the European hospital. So giving you one example, because you asked about examples. I visit the European hospital. The European hospital in Gaza near Khan Yunis is one of the most important hospitals. This hospital was, before the war, was powered by solar energy. 40%, almost 50% of all energy was provided from solar. With the war, there are no longer solar panels. So what happened? They had to use the generators, diesel generators. So for a longer period of time, the hospital couldn't work because there was no solar because of the war, and there was no fuel. And now that they have the fuel, which is good news, the generators obviously are broken. And the spare parts are not allowed to be brought to Gaza because are part of the list of items that are not allowed. So you can see the dilemma. So it was very practical. I met with the doctors, I met with the general manager, and he was explaining to me what does it mean managing an hospital in this circumstance. Some examples: surgeries without anesthesia, post-surgical treatments without antibiotics, with the proliferation of infections. 3 babies that died because there was no electricity and the incubators were not functioning. So these were very concrete elements that were shared with me. And that's why the energy and infrastructure is critical. I know that we have been talking about food and medical supplies, about water. All these items are fundamental. But let's be serious. Electricity, energy, and water is fundamental. What they told me is that they don't have access to the water system. It's broken. There is no longer the water and sanitation system in Gaza. So now they are taking it from the ground, and it's contaminated in an hospital. So this is the real dilemma that you see in Gaza today due to the destruction of public infrastructure. Another example. We are now providing fuel to the gas stations. I met with a driver of an ambulance. He has 9 ambulances that he managed. He said that before the ceasefire, he had the 9 ambulances stopped because there was no fuel. Now, in the last 3 weeks, all the ambulances are functioning. So I saw hope, which is the ceasefire allowed the UN to bring food, to bring water, to bring medicaments, to bring fuel. So the ceasefire has provided an important signal. So let's not waste the opportunity going backwards, and let's go forward, which means let's create the conditions for early recovery, particularly on shelters, roads, hospitals, schools, electricity, water, sewage, and waste management.
Thank you so much. Kristen Salumi from Al Jazeera English. I'm wondering if you can tell us how many people UNOPS has in Gaza on a daily basis. Like, how large is the staff there? And you talked about the importance of getting electricity into the region. but I wonder, given Israel's reluctance to work with UNRWA, if UNOPS is taking over more of the food distribution as well. And then finally, sorry, I know this is a lot of questions, but given the destruction that you've seen, and knowing that forcible displacement is against international law, I nevertheless wonder about the ability to rebuild in the north, given there is so much destruction, and what are the challenges that you see there with people? Can people live amidst that and have large-scale rebuilding at the same time? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, definitely we are not taking from UNRWA. UNRWA is irreplaceable, as we have said it in many occasions. In the case of UNOPS, we have a team there. We have been in Gaza for 14 years or 15 years. We have around 100 colleagues in Gaza. So we stayed and delivered in all these areas, from fuel to managing this system, so the UN 2720 system. To bring an image or a metaphor, it's like a control traffic tower in an airport. So it's what UNOPS is doing. We approve the entry of aid into Gaza based on the real priorities. So it's not first come, first served. We ensure that the approvals of aid are based on real needs, and then we also provide accountability and transparency. If you go to the website 2720.org, you will know the amount of aid that has been brought and what was rejected and why was rejected. So this kind of transparency and accountability, it's a confidence building mechanism. So it will be very important to use it for the next phase. So what are the difficulties, going to your question about the difficulties that I see on the operations, particularly in the next phase? And again, the point that I made about rubble and debris is quite impressive. When I was there, and I visited recently Afghanistan, I've been also in Ukraine, in Cabo Delgado, in Mozambique, we have teams in all these places. What I saw in Gaza is similar to what you see in a massive earthquake. In a massive earthquake, where things collapse completely. So the recovery in Gaza is possible, the same way that has been possible in places affected by massive earthquakes. So we need to find a way, but we cannot wait, because the point is, it's utopian to be talking about reconstruction without going first to rubble removal and to early recovery, which means that you need roads. You cannot remove the rubble without rehabilitating the roads. I've been there. It's impossible to circulate. We shouldn't even call it roads. Then to remove the rubble, you need electricity, you need water, because the machines cannot work without electricity. So that the early recovery component, which is removing the rubble, waste management, creating this rehabilitation of critical infrastructure is fundamental. So it will require lots of planning, and it will require lots of collaboration. I don't want to be arrogant. I lead an agency, UNOPS, that is the 5th largest agency in the system, I've been told. UNOPS cannot do it alone. No agency can do it alone. Nobody can do it alone. The level of destruction and the amount of rubble that is there would require strong partnership in the system and in the multilateral system, obviously with the best expertise. We are part of that option. We are part of that effort, bringing our practical solutions.
Bisan?
Thank you very much, Bisan Abukwik with Al Jazeera Arabic. This is maybe a hypothetical question, but from what you have seen, can you give a rough estimate of how much in dollars would it is required to actually rebuild Gaza, and how long do you think it would take? And my second question is, given what President Trump has proposed, and of course, we know the UN position on that and on forced displacement. The Arab countries apparently might be discussing some sort of proposal or counter-proposal. Has the UN been in contact, your teams, have they been in contact with anyone from the Arab countries in terms of any counter-proposals to that, to what President Trump has mentioned time and time again?
Thank you. In terms of costs, the assessment that has been done brings us to $30 billion cost. So that's the cost, the estimated cost of the damage cost. But as you know, one thing is what is the cost of the damage. Another thing is the cost of recovery and reconstruction, which very likely is higher. So we are dealing with a number that is quite significant. So at least 30 billion. So this is an important moment for the international community. It's a moment of mobilization. Tom Fletcher, my colleague Tom Fletcher, was in Gaza a few days ago. He clearly made a call to bring more aid into Gaza and to bring more solidarity into Gaza. UNOPS has been in contact with multiple donors. We are bringing our availability, our expertise. For instance, on the waste management, on Rubble, we have been with other agencies in collaboration with other UN agencies. We have approached donors trying to mobilize the international community. And of course, this includes also the Arab countries, but not only the Arab countries. We are in contact with all countries, trying to mobilize them for this new phase of the early recovery, but in the short term, humanitarian aid. But I forgot to say something, if I may. Because I know that because there are no journalists in Gaza, it's only through these briefings that we have the chance to share with you our impressions. And I'm going to say something that is subjective, and apologies because it's not based on numbers, it's a perception. When I was in Gaza today, I saw a level of destruction that is much higher than 1 year ago when I visited Gaza already during the war. But I saw more hope in the faces, with the people that I engaged with, in the children that were with more smiley faces than I saw 1 year ago. I saw food in the markets. I saw people in the streets, everything destroyed, people obviously very impoverished, but clearly with hope. So the point is, let's not waste the opportunity that the ceasefire has created. Maybe not everything is perfect, but the UN has been able to provide more aid. And this is obviously the first phase, and it's a moment of hope and opportunity. So I insist on this point because I know that we are in a specific and difficult context, and I really hope that from what I saw, that we don't miss, that we don't fail to the people that are expecting more aid and a new future.
Ibtisam?
Thank you. My name is Ibtisam Azim, Al Arab Al Jadid newspaper. I have first two follow-ups. You talked about the fuel that you are able to get into Gaza. Could you put this into perspective in the sense of what you really need compared to what you are getting, etc., and where does this fuel go really? I mean, to hospital, to public, and also on the $30 billion. What does this actually include? Does this include only rebuilding of public places, streets, infrastructure? What about the or does it also include the destroyed houses of people? If you could clarify. And then also on solar panels that were destroyed due to bombing, etc. Are you able to get any, and if not, into Gaza, and if not, why not? Thank you.
Thank you. There are points that I can answer, others that I may not have the data, but I'll be glad to engage at another occasion on the specific data. Going directly to the fuel. The amount of fuel that we are providing is consistent with the needs. So finally, after 15 months of being well below the needs, now we are providing what is needed, and by the way, consistent with what was the deal in the ceasefire. So this 1.3, between 1.2 and 1.3 million liters per day. Where is this fuel going? So the fuel that is brought by UNOPS and distributed by UNOPS goes to gas stations, and from those gas stations that we manage and we operate, it is distributed to around 140, 150 facilities. It includes bakeries, includes wash, so water, sanitation, waste management, so infrastructures that are dealing with this, hospitals. And this is obviously in collaboration with the UN sister agencies. UNICEF does one part, WHO does other part. So we are overseeing the system, bringing the fuel, distributing the fuel, and then the capillarity is ensured by other agencies. But we have the monitors. So UNOPS have monitors doing the monitoring of all operations, even the operations that are being conducted by other agencies. So we have a system where our monitors take part of the distribution in the trucks, and then they have a system to regularly monitor how the fuel is being used and spent. So this element is critical because this element brings transparency and accountability, which is obviously a fundamental element regarding trust. We know that fuel is obviously always a topic that triggers questions, and that's why a strong monitoring system has been critical. About the needs, when we'll get the power station functioning, obviously we'll need more fuel because Gaza depends on electricity, on fuel. Today, there is no electricity, centralized production of electricity. There was a power station that for the last 6 years, UNOPS was assuring in terms of provision of fuel, and through that, we managed to get go from 6 hours a day of electricity to 12 hours a day. Today, that power station is stopped. We hope that we can restart operation of the power station, and in that moment, we'll need more fuel to be provided. But you mentioned solar panels. It's not normal that I'm a climate veteran. I've been working on climate since I was 20 years. I've taken part of all COPs. I've been minister in my country on environment and energy. And you see that I'm talking about fuel because there are no other alternative in Gaza today than fuel, but that is not sustainable. So I really hope that when we build back, we'll build back better, which means that we will have a better energy mix, ensuring that Gaza relies more on solar energy, on interconnected facilities with transmission lines, and less on fuel. But for the time being, let's make no mistake, we have to use what is available, and it's fuel. Final point about the 30 billion. The 30 billion is an assessment. I would mention this with some sort of prudence. It's an assessment. It was not conducted by UNOPS. I'm using figures from the UN family and from the World Bank, so it's based on the assessment needs. This is a figure that recently also in a noon press conference was shared with you. It's mainly about public infrastructure, and obviously if we bring also all the needs in terms of houses, very likely we'll need to go to a different level. So it's a very prudent or conservative number. So that's why I mentioned international solidarity needed.
Thank you. Ephraim?
Thanks, Farhan. My name is Ephraim Kosaifi from the Arab News Daily. The State of Palestine has circulated to member states yesterday, I believe, a detailed plan of its own for the reconstruction of Gaza. It's a very long report for, I don't know if you had a chance to look at it. It was like a 60-page report. But basically, it's saying that for the first initial period of 6 months, $3.5 billion could go a long way in reactivating essential services, reconnecting water, electricity, sanitation, telecommunication, even getting the government agencies to work again. I wonder if you had a look at that report, what you think of it, and are the numbers realistic compared with the numbers you just gave us now?
Thank you. I had a chance to meet the Prime Minister of Palestine in yesterday. Yes, it was yesterday. I had meetings with Israel and with the Palestinian Authority yesterday, and indeed I had the chance to learn about the plan. And by the way, it's very consistent with our availability. So there is a huge alignment, I would say, in the international community about what is needed. You need shelters. Very likely in the short term, you need transitional shelters, which is much better than tents. And you need roads, you need sewage, water, electricity, schools, hospitals. So I would say that there is no dispute regarding the needs. What we need is political will. We need peace. I would say there will be no problem at all in getting a plan and aligning the UN agencies and other protagonists' capacity to provide a response. It's important that we start the work now. It's true that there are these plans. I have also heard from my team our own efforts in terms of assessment needs. For instance, we are conducting assessment needs in multiple areas. But I would say what has been brought is consistent with our expectations. And by the way, I also had a very productive meeting with Israel, and clearly the capacity that UNOPS can provide is very much aligned with all member states' priorities and interests. But I would say the moment is to create the conditions for early recovery. Reconstruction is something that we can only prepare once we have the conditions for early recovery.